Welcome everyone to the 15th LRA Research to Practice show. The purpose of our show is to connect what's going on in research in the field to what could and should be happening in our classrooms. And today our show features the Early Career Award winner, Dr. Amy Hutchinson, and some of her colleagues who she's working on a project with. She's going to be sharing her latest work, which is the Technology Integration Project, and she's joined by others, and I'll let them go ahead and introduce themselves, starting with Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy Hutchinson. I am an assistant professor at Iowa State University, and the two guests I have with me today, I'll let them introduce themselves, but they are both current doctoral students at Iowa State and collaborators on the project. Lindsay, you want to introduce yourself?
As Amy said, I am a doctoral student. I've been working with Amy for the last 3 years. So I've had an opportunity to really follow her recent trajectory, for which she won this award. I'll be finishing up my dissertation, which is actually a slice of this project that she's doing this year, and finishing up my program at Iowa State. Jen?
Hi, I'm Jen Thoma. I am an instructional coach and also a doctoral student of Amy's, and have learned so much through this project. That is about it.
Thank you all so much for being here. We are going to be taking questions. If you're following us on Twitter with the hashtag LRA show, we'll take any questions that you might have that we can throw to the panel during the discussion today. But we're going to start by asking Amy if you would describe the Technology Integration Project and also talk about how you got to this project and how the project evolved to where it is.
Sure. So the project actually comes from a long line of research in which I've spent time in classrooms with my overarching research goal of helping teachers better integrate technology into their literacy instruction, or supporting them in doing that and looking at how they can do that to help students become digitally literate. And so over the course of a number of research studies, began to notice some patterns as one, that teachers have a really difficult time either figuring out where to start with integration. They want to integrate, they think it's important, but they're just not sure where to start. Or for teachers who are integrating and they're in this process already, they know how to start planning this instruction, they still get lost somewhere in that process because they encounter a barrier of some kind that they hadn't anticipated, and then before they know it, the entire lesson becomes about the instruction, or becomes about the technology rather than the instructional goal that they set out to teach. And so they've ended up teaching a lesson on problem-solving technology rather than on literacy. So we saw this pattern happen over and over again. So we ended up developing something called the Technology Integration Planning Cycle. Lindsay was really involved in this research with me and is a co-author on the article that we published about this cycle. It was published in the Reading Teacher in 2014. And the Technology Integration Planning Cycle kind of overcomes some of these problems in that it provides a way for teachers to think about, a process for teachers to think about how to integrate technology into their instruction. But more importantly, it does two other things for teachers. One, it asks them to consider what integrating the technology offers or brings to the instruction, so they can realize that it is adding value to their instruction. But it also asks them to consider in advance the potential constraints that they may have by or barriers because they're using this technology. So for example, you may find this really interesting tool that allows your students to respond to text in this great way, but every student has to have an individual account. That's not a problem in itself, but it is something that could take over a lot of your instructional time if you haven't thought about how you're going to handle that in advance. And so in any case, it asks teachers to consider these barriers in advance so they can maximize their instructional time and experience success when they're integrating technology, and then hopefully be more likely to continue to do that. So develop this technology integration planning cycle, and the project that we're currently working on, the Technology Integration Project, is teaching teachers how to plan instruction with this cycle. It's plugging them into a community, a professional learning community, in which the goal of that community is to focus on integrating technology into literacy instruction. They're getting resources, they're getting support from researchers, and so it's a professional development model to see how this planning cycle can support teachers in better integrating technology into their literacy instruction.
Thank you. And can you talk a little bit, can you describe and maybe walk us through that technology integration planning framework, what steps a teacher might engage in?
Sure. So the primary goal, or the overarching, I guess, central point of the cycle is considering your instructional goal. What is the literacy goal that you want to teach? It's the starting point and the ending point of the cycle, and this is really important because we really want teachers to remain completely aware of what it was they were setting out to teach in the first place, and not privilege the technology in favor of the literacy goal. So it starts with, what is your instructional goal? What is it that you even want to teach? And then what are some instructional approaches? What are some ways you might teach this? And that depends. There's a series of questions that you ask based on your teaching style, your classroom, the strengths of your students, all of those things. And then considering what technology can support me in teaching this and even enhance it, support it, make it better, help me to do additional kinds of literacy tasks. And then I ask teachers to consider what am I afforded by using this technology. And then at this point, there's actually an exit point to the cycle to say, if you're not afforded anything by using this technology, if you're not actually meeting that original instructional goal that you set out to meet, then maybe you shouldn't use technology in that way. So it's asking teachers to continually think back and reflect on, what am I trying to teach with this technology, so the technology doesn't overwhelm the goal. And then teachers are asked to consider those potential constraints like I talked about. What do I need to consider in advance? The things that I may encounter as I'm teaching with this technology that may detract from my instructional goal. Can I think in advance about ways to overcome those things so that when I'm actually in my classroom, I'm not spending all my time just troubleshooting technology, which that may still happen, that you may have to troubleshoot, but you can do it far less if you consider some of those things in advance. And then finally, also considering what might need to change about my classroom because I'm teaching with technology. For example, just the physical space may need to look different. Students may need to be grouped differently. They may need to be free to walk around the room and outside the classroom because they have mobile devices. Thinking also about how are you going to collect work that's done digitally, how you're going to assess work that's done digitally, because it is a shift. So thinking about those things in advance can ensure that you have a better product at the end that really shows students learning. So that's the general gist of it. In the article, there's a series of questions to ask along the way as you plan with the cycle.
Thank you. And when you're talking about your roles, do you want to take a second and just describe all of your roles in this research project?
Sure. So I am the lead for the project, and it's kind of comes out of a line of research that I've developed. But as Lindsay said, she's been working on the project, or on my research with me, since she's been a student here for 3 years, and so she has involved in that way. And Jen is actually an instructional coach in the district in which we're doing the study, but she's also a doctoral student, so she has dual roles in that regard. So that works out great. So I'll just let Jen and Lindsay each tell you a little bit about what it is that they do for the project. Why don't you start, Lindsay?
Sure. So a lot of my work is partnering with Amy on data collection and really just kind of being a touch point for the teachers in the project. In this particular project, we have a lot of people who are kind of in and out of it. We have a core group of about 33 teachers that we're working with. We're also working with instructional coaches, and Jen will talk more about that. Their media specialists in this school district are also involved in the project. And so we do a lot of different things that are kind of structural as part of the project to support these teachers. For example, we send weekly, we send resources to teachers. We alternate between just resources and a resource and a lesson plan. Initially, we kind of outlined, based on Amy's research and some other work that we've done thinking about what tools are most useful to teachers. We borrowed some app sheets. We've made a lot of instructional materials for this particular group of teachers. So knowing in their context and the tools that they're working with, we've designed these pieces of information for them to help them think about how to use the tools in their context. I'm also responsible for surveying the teachers each month. We spend once a week to do a technology check-in to get teachers self-report of how they're using technology for one full week each month. We're actually doing that this week right now. I also partner with Amy, and the two of us spend a lot of time in classrooms. Currently, in the project, our time has been split between observing teachers, just being in their classroom when they're using technology and literacy instruction, and then also meeting with individual teachers or groups of teachers. Amy talked about those technology PLCs earlier, and sitting down with them and actually planning and working them through the cycle. Amy already explained the steps, but a lot of what we're finding is that these teachers, and this may be jumping forward to another question, Paula, but what we're finding a lot of is that different teachers and different groups of teachers are very strong in some parts of that cycle and need different kinds of supports in others. So some may be very good at thinking about affordances but really can't think through the constraints. So we've spent some time via email and in person meeting with teachers and doing those kinds of things. So that's kind of the broad picture of my role and the work that I do in the project.
Okay, and at the beginning of the project, one of the things that I helped to do a little bit was make those connections for Amy and Lindsay with the district and help them with some of the resources that we have available so they could think through what planning might need to look like for teachers, setting their instructional goals, what resources we have available, and then also Amy came in and helped the coaches. She provided us with a list of questions that would help us as we're working with teachers around the technology integration planning cycle, and then walked through the cycle with us so we would know how to help support teachers through the process. And then what I am studying with this grant process is just at the PLC level, so at the grade level meetings, how does the technology integration planning cycle play out with teachers? Where do they need more support, and what's working really well for them?
And we will have made available the article, a link to the article that where this integration cycle is featured, and you can find the link to that via our hashtag on Twitter, hashtag LRA show. And we can make that available to you all. Thank you so much.
And we also actually have a project website that we can provide the link for as well, so you can see some of the resources and things that are being provided to teachers, and it has a link to that article as well.
That would be excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. As you're working with this this project and this process, I know at the forefront of your mind, it's really creating a space for that intersection of technology and literacy instruction. Can you talk a little bit about some of the benefits that you're seeing when teachers are able to integrate this into their instruction?
Yes, absolutely. So I think the entire project is couched in the idea that you cannot be literate without being digitally literate. Those are synonymous, and I think this is such a still relatively new way of thinking about literacy, but an undeniable one that we really help teachers first develop that mindset of how important it is currently to be able to read, write, and communicate with both printed text and digital text. If you cannot read, write, and communicate digitally, then you are not fully literate, because there are many people who argue that the printed text is no longer the dominant mode of communication, that often we actually read, write, and communicate more digitally than we do with printed text. And so just helping teachers understand that idea, first of all. And then beyond that, it really is teachers' purview to teach students the dominant modes and genres of communication, and currently that includes digital text. So that those two things are vital. They're just teaching them literacy skills that they need to be literate, and digital skills are woven into the Common Core standards. So I think as those are continually adopted and taken up by states, teachers will more and more begin to integrate in those ways. But I think beyond that, also there is just digital tools actually provide opportunities to enhance traditional literacy skills, not just digital skills, but they can enhance a reading of a printed text by providing students with different ways of responding to that text, or providing them with background information on a topic. And I think it's really important too for teachers to remember that it doesn't have to be one or the other, so we encourage teachers to actually combine both printed and digital text to maximize whatever it is that they're doing in their classroom. And then finally, recognizing that the skills are actually very compatible. So the skills that you need to read and write in digital environments are built on traditional literacy skills that you need to read a printed text. They just go beyond that. There are some additional things that are required. So you still need to know how to comprehend alphabetic written text to navigate a website, but you also need to know some of those navigation skills. It becomes more important to know how to acquire meaning from a video or audio or images, because there's more of those, and to know how to navigate hyperlinks, and to critically choose a resource. And so a lot of those are things that you do with a printed text, but this just extends beyond those a bit. And so I think that to respond to that original question, students are benefited because by doing this, they're able to actually just be fully literate, because they're able to read, write, and communicate in what are now the dominant modes of communication, which is printed and digital texts.
And Lindsay or Jen, if either of you would like to speak to some examples of this that you noticed when in your data collection with teachers or your class observations.
Well, listening to Amy talk about it, it's so interesting to think about how it's connecting to the teachers in our study. I think initially, the very first thing that we did was every single participant in the study attended a professional development session. We held in person as well as online sessions, and Amy designed a really teacher-friendly and engaging kind of professional development initial session just to help them think through the cycle and think through using technology. And I remember, and teachers still refer to this, she walks them through an example where she has a single instructional goal, and then through thinking together with the group about the instructional approach and some of the affordances of the tools that she was thinking about, all of a sudden they're meeting an additional 4, 5, 6 Common Core standards just because they've thought through how to meet their initial goal by using this technology. And I think, and we are continually surprising teachers, and I think teachers more importantly are surprising themselves with the idea that by really effectively integrating technology into their literacy instruction, not only are they better preparing students to be digitally literate, but they're also teaching more of their content than they ever realized. And I think that that's something that's been really consistent, whether it's in a 5th grade or middle school classroom where they're using a variety of different tools, iPads, Chromebooks, lots of tools for one project, or a 3rd grade classroom we were in a month ago where they were adding audio to a PowerPoint. And their end result, they had mixed that digital tool with some of the print text they were using and had this really exciting outcome just because the teacher had been willing to think through, okay, how can I engage these 3rd graders in summarizing this text and in sharing what they know about this text in a digital way?
Along those same lines, I think one of the things that the technology integration planning cycle has helped teachers to think through are the digital literacy skills, not just the literacy skills. So one thing that we've been able to do as coaches is help remind teachers, okay, those are your literacy skills that you're teaching. What are you going to help teachers think through with the digital piece? What skills do they need to have as you begin to plan through this?
And I think to add to that as well, when Amy was talking about the steps, she talked about those exit points that are in the cycle. And that there is an exit point after you've gotten through thinking about your instructional goal, your instructional approach, the affordances of the tool, and the constraints. Those constraints are going to overwhelm your instruction. Then again, that's an exit point from the cycle. And that, I think, has been really empowering for teachers to know that just because you say, I want to use VoiceThread, doesn't mean that you should use it. If it's not the best tool for your instructional goal, then exit. And I think that just that little arrow in that cycle has been so, it's okay. You can either go choose a different tool, or maybe paper pencil really is the best way to teach this particular instructional goal. I think the other main piece of that teachers have, a lot of the teachers in the project have become really accustomed to thinking about constraints before affordances, and that's not relegated to this project. That comes from Amy's line of research. That comes from a lot of other people's lines of research. We see that teachers start off with what's going to go wrong and how can I navigate that. So it's very intentional in that cycle that we ask teachers to think about what can this tool bring to your instruction before you think about what potential constraints are there that I need to navigate. And a lot of our planning meetings are just kind of pushing back with teachers. Like, yes, for example, Amy mentioned earlier, the individual student accounts. Yes, that might be a constraint for you. But before we get to that, how's the tool providing you with better instruction to meet your instructional goals?
That's such a great point, Lindsay, and I think teachers sometimes overcome those barriers when they think about the affordances that they do have, so they'll work a little harder to overcome some of that.
And how do you get teachers started in this cycle? Is there a starting point when you're considering making some of these decisions, or is there a place where teachers might need extra support in order to engage in some of the decisions required within the cycle?
That's actually a great question. So one of the things that we've really learned through this project that we consider a lot, and I've actually just written an article about this, is that it's really important to meet teachers where they are. So I think that every teacher is at a very different place in their planning process and in just their teaching in general, and then also in their overall pedagogical knowledge, their overall technological knowledge, their content knowledge, all of those things. And so I think that the purpose of the cycle is really to do just that, to meet teachers where they are. Because even within these professional learning communities that the teachers are grouped into in this project, there is a wide range. Even with a group of 3 to 4 teachers, they can look very different, even though they're planning together on a daily basis. So one of the ways that we encourage teachers to do that is actually to create a long-range plan, to think about, okay, so what are my literacy goals? What am I responsible for teaching my students? And then what do my students actually know about using technology already? What do I know about using technology? And how can I strategically develop their skills as I teach them these literacy goals? How can I strategically also develop their digital skills in a way that builds and will allow me to do better and more interesting projects that better teach literacy skills by the end of the year. So we actually, at the beginning of our project, asked all the teachers to do this, and if they felt even overwhelmed by that, we actually gave them a sample progression. Just said, okay, maybe you just want to start with something really simple, like just integrating, using an image, finding an image online, thinking about how images can convey meaning and support literacy. And so we are very aware of that, and so we have built that into part of the planning process. And Lindsay, what would you add to that?
I think it's our consideration of that is kind of guiding the way that we provide resources to teachers, because they are at so many different levels. We have teachers in the project who are telling us about tools that they know about that we've never heard of. And we have teachers who just really have no idea what that looks like. So to kind of, these weekly emails that I referred to earlier, where we send out a resource every week and then a lesson plan every week, we use those as touchstones when we're planning with teachers. Because we know at least that with those tools, that these teachers have a specific guide that was made just customized for them to think about how to engage with this tool. And we can say, okay, if you're looking for something that's going to engage your students where they're doing a digital presentation, remember when we've shared these 3 resources and this lesson plan that can serve as an example for you. And some teachers need that, and some teachers use that, and some teachers that's not as valuable to them. I know that I was surprised. We've done a couple of just check-ins with teachers to just ask them what's valuable about our support and what's valuable about being a participant in the project. And we were surprised at how many teachers really feel that those weekly, we call them app sheets, that explain each of the tools, how much those weekly app sheets are really influencing their instruction, and it helps them focus. So many teachers have talked to us about how they go to these kind of one-stop shopping professional development seminars, which is what Jen's familiar with. She's still seeing that in her district. I know that Amy and I both experienced several of those when we were classroom teachers as well. That's still a really popular model. And this helps them kind of focus those into their instructional goals. We try to never provide resources without first marrying that tool to what it would look like to teach an instructional goal.
And as you're working with teachers, you're also working with the instructional coaches who support those teachers. Is that correct?
Yes. So the instructional coaches actually meet with the teachers in their professional learning communities, and the instructional coaches are vitally looped into the project. They read they get all the weekly emails and resources and all of that same information, and they have been coached on how to interact with teachers around this. Also recognizing that you don't have to be an expert in technology integration as the instructional coach in order to support the teachers, because what you really need to be able to do is guide your teachers in making sure that they're thinking consistently about what their instructional goals are, and then guiding them to places where they can find the right resources.
And do you find as you're working with teachers that there are any challenges in keeping them within that cycle? What are you doing as an instructional coach to make sure that you're supporting teachers in their work in that cycle?
I'll start with that, and then I'll let Jen add on to it because she is an instructional coach working with the teachers. But yes, so here's what almost always happens when we sit down with a group of teachers. They say, no matter how many times we've drilled this into their heads, don't start with the technology necessarily. They say, oh, we saw your resource this week about, I'll use VoiceThread as an example again. We want to do something with VoiceThread. Well, that's great. We're glad that you like VoiceThread, but what is it that you're teaching? And does it make sense to teach that with VoiceThread? Is there a good way to integrate VoiceThread into your instruction right now that makes sense and helps you teach your instructional goals? So yes, I think it's a tendency, it's a very natural one, because I even find myself doing it with teachers, to think that way and then realize, wait, what is it that I'm even trying to teach my students? And so I think that is a constant thing, but because we've talked about it so consistently, teachers say, oh yeah, okay, here's what I want to teach. And I think part of it has been really helping teachers drill down to what is it I'm really teaching, because a lot of teachers were finding in this particular project, I'm not saying this is true of a majority of teachers by any means, it's just in this particular project, they start with sort of projects that they want to do rather than what it is that those projects necessarily teach. And then they have to think, wait, what am I teaching? What standards am I teaching by doing these projects? So it's just a difference in a way of thinking for them. But I think they all have been very excited about taking this approach and recognizing they really are addressing some important literacy goals.
I agree. I think it's finding that balance between giving teachers exposure to new tools and seeing what the affordances and constraints are, and then thinking about how to integrate that into classroom instruction and what does that look like for my students. So starting with that goal is so very important. And I know right now for our teachers, we're in a transitional year where we will be adopting the core. So they're learning new standards we're basically building the plane as we're flying it. So they have a lot coming at them right now. Yeah.
And we have a question from our Twitter feed. How would you suggest that pre-service teachers, pre-service teacher educators prepare their pre-service teachers to use technology for literacy instruction? Do you have any advice for that group?
Yes, this is something that we are constantly assessing in our instructional program. In our literacy courses in specific here at Iowa State, we use this technology, we teach the technology integration planning cycle just as a way to even get them thinking in that direction. In Iowa, we actually have a high number of districts that have one-to-one digital devices for their students. It's not the entire state, but we do have a lot of schools that do that, and so pre-service teachers know that coming out they're likely to be in a place where they're going to be expected to integrate technology, but they also might be among they might be a minority in knowing how to do that, because in some cases teachers aren't necessarily, this is new for practicing teachers and they didn't learn about it in their pre-service teacher program, so they may be expected to be leaders even though they're young teachers. Something that's really important and interesting to note here is that in a study that we did that was published in Reading Research Quarterly in 2011, we found that teachers in their first 5 years of instruction actually integrate technology, or sorry, in the first 5 years of teaching, integrate technology less than teachers with more experience, than teachers who've been teaching 5 years or more, than all other age groups actually, even if they've been teaching 60 years and would be, you know, presumably less tech savvy. Those teachers still reported integrating technology more than the teachers in their first 5 years. So in digging into that more, I think that we assume that because pre-service younger teachers coming into the profession have grown up with technology or presumed to be digital natives, that they value the use of technology in instruction and that they know how to integrate it into technology well and are into instruction well, and I don't think that is always the case. So as we find in our courses, these teachers know how to use pre-service teachers know how to use technology for their own personal use, but they aren't necessarily savvy at using it for instruction. And those are actually two very different skills. And so the first thing that we focus on in our pre-service teachers is actually helping teachers to see the importance of integrating technology and helping them to see why it's important. In that same article that I mentioned, we actually found that there's a very high correlation between how important teachers perceive technology integration to be and the extent to which they do it. So if teachers perceive it to be important, they'll make it happen. Even when they encounter barriers, they can often find ways to overcome those barriers because they believe it to be important. So part of what we do is actually just teaching them why it's important. Why do you need to do this? Why do you need to persist through the hard parts? Because there will definitely be hard parts and irritating parts. Why do you need to persist through this? So teaching them just, you know, thinking about those dispositions and why that's important, and then teaching them how to do it effectively and not assuming that they know how to integrate well just because they might be considered as a digital native.
And through your work, do you see any challenges based on access to technology? And if you do, how do you address that? Or the teachers you work with, how do they address it?
Yes, we do, and we address it creatively in many ways. Lindsay and I did some professional development for a school where every teacher had one iPad in their classroom, and they wanted to know how they could use one iPad. And that is a challenge. How can you be expected to integrate technology when you have so little? So that's a pretty extreme example if that's all you're working with. But through our project, actually, one of the things that we've done is we have a set of iPads that travels from school to school. Teachers can check them out so that they can have increased access, which I know that this is not something that everyone can have, but it's something that was important for us, for teachers who really wanted to do this but didn't have access. We're able to help provide it through this project. And that can oftentimes lead to a school administrator seeing that teachers can do this and do it well, and that students are excited about it, and perhaps help them to value it more and give funding to it when that's an option. I think it's really important to remember that you don't have to have a digital device for every student. You can actually do a lot with a few devices. So there's a lot that can happen in small groups. If you have 5 devices in a classroom, you can do a lot of small group instruction that can be really valuable. So I don't think you have to wait for one-to-one, even though that certainly is ideal. I think even with a few things, there's a lot of small group instruction that can be really powerful.
And we've seen teachers, you know, in this project specifically, it speaks exactly to what Amy was saying about kind of if you believe in it, it will come. So if they value technology, then when they're thinking through that cycle, when they've identified their instructional goal and they think through their instructional approach, they're doing exactly what Amy says. They're finding ways to put students in small groups to match their instructional approach to maybe groups of 3 or 4, and kind of scaffolding or staggering the ways that they're interacting with those specific devices. And they're coming up with really creative ways to accommodate 3, 4, 5 iPads in a classroom. Or one laptop cart that's shared for the entire school. And some of the teachers who are participating in our project do have really limited access to technology, but we're seeing those teachers overcome those barriers because they value using technology so much.
If you were going to give some advice to instructional coaches engaging teachers in this process, what would that be?
I think we should let our instructional coach address that question. Jen.
Absolutely. So some advice for instructional coaches just in helping teachers with those barriers. So thinking system-wide, if teachers don't have access to technology, what are some resources that you can help get set in place, whether it's writing a grant, whether it's seeking out your education agency, going to your administrator or your parent-teacher organization. So just being creative in that way. Also, making connections for teachers is very important. So when Amy was talking about those digital literacy skills, so as teachers are incorporating digital devices into the classroom, helping teachers to make those connections of what skills do students need to have as they're working. And Amy, I'm not sure if the questions that you provided us you could make available to coaches, but I have found that very helpful when going into a PLC meeting, making sure that I'm thinking through the questions that I might ask teachers to help encourage them a little bit more, give them just that little nudge that they need to move to that next level. And Amy talked about this before too, but being a learner, we don't need to know everything, and there's no possible way that we could. But just knowing who are the experts and how can I make those connections for teachers, and how can I make those connections for myself as well.
Do you have any advice or suggestions for teachers who are just getting started and maybe feel a little bit apprehensive about integrating technology into their instruction? Do you have any words that you can use to speak to that?
I think it's just what we talked about previously, which is just start somewhere, I think is one thing, anywhere. I think focus on the strengths of your students and your personal strengths, and use that as your starting point. What is it that you're good at, or maybe you're just excited about something in particular? So start there. Recognize that you don't have to do everything at once. You don't have to have your students building this amazing website from scratch to show their learning. You can start very simply by having them use an iPad to draw an image and record a response to something that they read, something very simple. It does not have to be this amazing, overwhelmingly large project when you start. You just need to start, and be strategic in how you start, rather than thinking about wow, I could never do that, I can't possibly teach my students that because I don't know how to do it. You only have to be with them, or you maybe just one step ahead of them. You don't have to know what that website's going to look like at the end of the year. You just have to know what tomorrow looks like. And so I say start where you are and build on the strengths of you and your students.
I think to support what Amy's talking about, she mentioned earlier the long-range plan that we ask teachers to complete. And I think it's important for teachers to remember that if you want at the end of the year your students to build, as Amy says, a website from scratch, then it's worth your time to think, okay, what do they need to know before they can, at the end of the year when they're building this website, what do they need to be doing in September to prepare them to do that? We need to start with some digital writing and just being in that space and thinking about what those spaces look like. So really being okay with knowing that you need to build their skills and being able to take that time and not trying to force it all at once. But just, I mean, it's the common backwards design, just thinking about it from that way. What do you need? Where do you need to start to be where you want to end up?
I think also allowing themselves grace. If something doesn't go well, one thing that I found is teachers are more than willing to share what went well as what did not go well, so they can learn from each other. And then the next time they go to incorporate that digital tool or a similar one, they know what to plan for with students beforehand.
And if you're thinking about your own next steps in this research project, if you want to describe those next steps as well as what researchers should be thinking about and looking into with regard to the integration of digital tools and literacy instruction.
I think up to now, in general in research, we spend a lot of time thinking, exploring what are the barriers for teachers, why aren't teachers integrating, what are they doing when they integrate. I think we have a good sense of that now, and the extent to which teachers are integrating, how that compares to how much we might want to see. How much integration we might want to see. So I think now really, and that's partially what I'm starting to address through this project and through the development of technology integration planning cycle, is how can we start helping teachers get past those barriers, move through those. What kinds of professional development models can we put in place? What kinds of tools can we provide to teachers to really help them do this and do it well? Because I think many teachers are very motivated to do it, but just still have a lot of these barriers that we've talked about and many that we haven't talked about. And so to me, I think that what really needs to be done is just continuing to think about creative and innovative ways to support teachers in doing this. It's a challenge because they're required to teach so many things in so many different ways, and time is always pressing. So one key part of what we've done is even just building the time that we spend with teachers into meetings during their school day and making it part of the professional learning community that they're already participating in as part of their professional lives in their school day. So I think really researchers need to continue thinking about ways that we can meet teachers where they are and realistically support them in integrating technology.
Are there any further questions that you are still seeking to answer as an instructional coach with your own work, Jen, with teachers that would sort of foster your work?
Absolutely. So I'm studying the PLC process and what supports do teachers need in order to make this a successful endeavor. So it's fabulous that we have this planning time, but what additional supports do administrators need in order to help their teachers? How can instructional coaches help teachers through this PLC process so we can get integration into the classroom in effective ways?
And as we're thinking about wrapping up our show here today, what final thoughts would you like to leave our audience with regarding the integration of technology and literacy skills? If each of you just want to share something we should be thinking about, or something that researchers should be thinking about, or something that instructional coaches or teachers, you can kind of pick an audience and share a final thought.
I would say for teachers, my piece of advice would be to just start somewhere. So right now I am trying to learn a new programming language, for example, for my own personal use to build websites. And I felt overwhelmed by this, so I thought about how teachers must feel by this. And I was like, I don't even know where to start. I was like, but I have to start somewhere, so I'm just going to start. And I was amazed at how quickly I figured out which language I needed to learn, what it would use, just by connecting, actually, through Twitter. That's a great way to connect and develop a professional learning community, or professional learning network that can support you. By just doing some quick searches online, I was amazed at how many resources were actually available to me by just starting and just by choosing to start. So I'll stop there. I could say much more, but I'll let Lindsay have a turn.
I think probably my final thought would really be to just always start with the instructional goal. Anytime you're thinking about integrating technology, technology is cool. It's a cool thing to use, and there's lots of awesome stuff out there in the world. And we get, in our personal lives, I think, that we get so accustomed to trying out new apps that just kind of bleeds into our instruction, which is great because I think that keeps students engaged and it prepares them for their futures. But I think anytime you're introducing that new tool, you've got to think, what am I teaching with it? So I think that carries through with teachers, that carries through with instructional coaches and researchers. I think we all need to be looking at what instructional goals are being met through using this technology.
I think one way to help that also as an instructional coach, one thing we can think about is if we do have the opportunity to have a captive room full of adults and our focus is in some content area, think about how you can integrate technology into that content area so that teachers can see how they might use it with students and get them hands-on, get them using the tool and practicing the tool during those sessions. So they will appreciate it as teachers having the practice, and then give them time to plan for instruction. So how might this look if we're setting this instructional goal using this particular tool or a tool similar to it?
Okay, and if I'm in the elevator with you and you're giving me an elevator pitch and you're saying, and I'm saying, okay, I really want to get started, but I just don't know how to get started. What's my very first step? How would you respond to that?
I would say read the article on the technology integration planning cycle in the Reading Teacher, because it really does do that. It really does explain in much more detail and depth than we could possibly do on the show about how to get started, about how to walk through those essential parts of the process and where to find resources too. One of the things we really have talked about is that you don't have to know 1,000 different resources. You just have to know a few good ones. Your instructional coach is actually a really good resource. And then there are a few key other places, including your project website, where you don't have to sift through 1,000 websites. You can sift through 1 or 2 and get started.
Well, I definitely plan on taking advantage of your website, and that, as well as information about the article, are being made available through our LRA show hashtag on Twitter, so you can follow us there. You can also find our information to this and other shows are archived, and they're available for you to view at any time. I just want to take a second and thank you so much for your time, your expertise. I know, at least for myself, this has been a very inspirational hour, and I look forward to checking out your resources, which will also be available on the LRA website in addition to through the Twitter hashtag. So thank you all so much for your time and for a really engaging and helpful discussion.
Great, thank you.